Dusk. Dusk is a game I loved before ever even having played Dusk. I remember following the game's creator's Twitter feed in anticipation of the game, just salivating at the screenshots and gameplay videos I saw posted there. Just waiting until I could play the damn thing, since I didn't yet own a PC back then. There was just something about its art style and the hype surrounding it that convinced me this was the perfect game for me. This was in no small part helped by its charming Quake engine aesthetic and the fittingly old school gameplay that accompanies it. I've been playing games like Doom, Quake and many other early FPSs like crazy during my teens, and this was the game that seemed to aim at bringing this style of game back. It basically just spoke to my sensibilities. This style of game was soon dubbed the Boomer shooter by its loving community. It wasn't the first game to set off this retro FPS trend, as there were already games like, for example, Strafe, aiming to appeal to that same nostalgia clamoring crowd. You could even say that games like Doom 2016 and Wolfenstein The New Order actually opened the doors for this style of game, with its rejection of many of the Call of Duty and Halo-like staples that were so plentiful in FPSs back then. But where those games still embraced many of modern FPS's boons like state-of-the-art graphics and a cinematic presentation, Dusk, on the other hand, stuck closer to something akin to the Quake engine's limitations. And where other indie attempts like the aforementioned Strafe also stuck to that sort of aesthetic, it was missing that certain feeling of authenticity. It didn't manage to transport you back to that magic time where you were hammering away at that crusty old off-white keyboard while the glow of that CRT monitor lighted up the near environment around you. Dusk, in comparison, only by booting up the game alone it already feels like you just booted up a game from the late 90s, like literally. Playing the game, you can just count off its influences, from Quake's polygonal aesthetic to Doom's monster closets to Duke 3D's interactivity to even the setting's visual look borrowing from anything from Redneck Rampage to Half-Life, and then topping it off with its own unique visual identity. So it wasn't the first one, but definitely the one that I feel set off the whole boomer shooter craze we know of today, in which I see newer projects in this vein, even mentioning Dusk as an influence among the more obvious classics like Doom and Quake. This is in no small part due to its authenticity while mixing it with its own unique style, instead of just slavishly adhering to its influences, because in the end, it is its own game deserving to stand proudly along with the games that influenced it. So Dusk was one of the earlier entries in this classic FPS resurgence, but not only is it one of the earliest examples of the boomer shooter genre, but also one that still stands out compared to the rest of the genre's output. Despite it by now being surpassed in many ways by more recent examples in the genre that are introducing newer gameplay elements and pushing the boundaries of what a boomer shooter can be. So why does it still stand out to me then? Well, other than just being a great example of the pure boomer shooter experience in terms of action and gameplay, it's the things that go beyond pure shooty boom boom gameplay that not only sets it apart from the pack, but also belies David Szymanski's past in game development. But before we delve into the past, there's two things in particular that I feel differentiate Dusk from others in the genre. And my first point of contention here would also be the one most talked about when people are discussing Dusk. So, let's get that out of the way first. Yeah, you don't even know. Dusk is a horror game. Horror not only thematically as represented in the visuals, but the actual feeling of horror. This is already somewhat obvious in the first level as you crawl out of the basement to find yourself in this rural estate that's in a severe state of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This level and the others of episode 1 introduce this horror mostly thematically, solely focusing on the visual side of things. It is only later when you get to the second episode that Szymanski lays down the proverbial hammer. It's the second mission of that episode, named Unseen, where you'll get your first taste of this blood-curdling horror. Here you are coming fresh of an immense frag fest that just took place in this huge industrial complex. After having ventured down a maintenance access tunnel there, leading toward the gloomy depths of the town of Dusk, you'll soon find that the mood changes drastically, as you're greeted by nothing but eerie silence. Gone are the staccato sounds of gunfire enveloping you. No more being surrounded by the blast of explosive projectiles. Just silence. And it's this sudden lack of adrenaline-fueled gameplay that you've grown so accustomed to that it immediately creates this uncomfortable vacuum. An uncomfortable vacuum that's a perfect set piece for setting the mood for what's to come. The game goes from a bunny-hopping fragfest to a show-stopping crawl. Except, it's only here that the show truly begins. Gone are the wide-open frag grounds. Now it's cramped corridors that take their place. Because of these cramped environments and some excellent sound design, you'll quickly be rethinking your playstyle, leaving the action hero ethos at the door and starting to carefully check every corner, while feeling ill at ease by the ominous foreboding messages scrawled on the walls. It is in this level that you're introduced to one of the game's more iconic enemy types, namely the Wendigo. The Wendigo is a quite unique enemy type that's being masterfully introduced in what can only be called a nail-bitingly intense encounter. Please allow me to explain, but do beware of spoilers. In this level there's a yellow key door marked Ruins Access that requires the corresponding colored key, meaning that you don't have immediate access to this area until you've secured said key. Close to where that door is though, you see a written message on the wall stating, "Don't go in the ruins." Well, yikes, what's in there then? This already sets the mood and ramps up the tension appropriately. The absolute lack of music here leaves you to focus on nothing but the eerie ambience the level provides, and the even more eerie lack of any enemy presence at all. The only enemy presence here are the already decimated bodies of soldiers lying around. What were they doing here and why did they all die so gruesomely? Upon further exploration, you quickly find the key enabling you to venture down into these aforementioned ruins. First though, you'll have to climb down this ladder, upon which you find yourself in a hole that's been dug out, with the only way forward ominously having been cordoned off. Your sickles though make quick work of that. The hallway you then find yourself in is long and devoid of any light but the dim shimmer provided by your dinky cheap flashlight. Though, darkness soon gives way to this strange bright fog and the dim red sheen of that red keycard you so desperately need to get out of this wretched place. A little further and your flashlight starts to falter, flickering on and off for a brief moment. What a relief, it still works. But that short moment of relief quickly makes way for intense anxiety, as you hear a desperate frantic breathing enveloping your surroundings, almost like something's breathing down your neck. "Don't trust your eyes," says another blood-scrawled message on the wall in front of you. You turn around frantically, only to find that your flashlight reveals nothing at all. Can I trust my eyes? Because whatever you're hearing, you're not seeing it, even though it sounds uncomfortably close. And suddenly, it strikes at you. But what is? You frantically start shooting around until you hear it. That typical Wendigo stinger, whereupon it reveals its perverted form. So, this is the Wendigo, a fun but quite scary enemy type, and one whose introduction does a great job of cutting up the action a bit, for that one thing that any boomer shooter needs to be able to offer me in order to enthrall me for longer than a few missions, but that so few offer but Dusk, and that is variety. After this encounter, you'll soon find yourself back in the familiar frantic fragfest, not only offering you the necessary adrenaline rush to relieve yourself of this anxiety, but now you have at least two solid reasons why your heart is nearly beating out of your chest. So, like countless people before me have stated before, Dusk is a horror game. A sense of lingering unease will often bring your fragging to a halt, not being entirely sure if you really have the upper hand here. And it being a banger FPS on top means it's a horror game that doesn't need to rely on you feeling powerless in order to induce that fear in you. Other horror games tend to thrive on abusing this feeling of powerlessness by bereaving you of any way to physically defend yourself in order to make you feel scared. Your only options being to cower in fear by either hiding or running away. And all this while you're being hampered in your movement by a stamina meter. These games are scary because they rely on you feeling weak and defenseless. Now, there is absolutely nothing wrong with games like this, as they're very effective at what they set out to do. But I do find it refreshing to have this game that is just as effective as horror, but where you're armed to the absolute teeth. But it'll be a broken flashlight in a dark area that will bring you to your knees in fear. This sense of fear is in no small part thanks to composer Andrew Househol's soundtrack. As par for the course for a boomer shooter, it is often suitably metal, thrashing and chuggy. But Andrew knows when that thrashing needs to make way for a more foreboding and moody soundtrack that is able to create this feeling of tension. And like mentioned before, when necessary for the required mood, he will even omit any music at all, which is in stark contrast to the mostly very heavy soundtrack, and therefore being double as effective. So earlier I stated that there were aspects of the game that belied Szymanski's past efforts in game development, and I then commenced to talk about the horror aspect of the game, which is indeed a big part of the game, but not necessarily the one that I find so unique about Dusk. The thing that I find sets Dusk apart from other boomer shooters is much more subtle and runs underneath the game in a way that you could easily be forgiven for not even noticing it at all. At first, it seemed kind of weird that David's past games were of the walking simulator variety, when compared with the action-packed FPS he delivered here, a genre known to be more contemplative, introspective and sedate in nature than what a first-person shooter typically tends to offer. But after finishing the third episode, I felt it made a lot of sense actually, as he does things here with narrative that are very interesting for what you think is just a simple FPS game. Once again, allow me to explain. The third episode starts off with cranking the Lovecraft to 11, as you find yourself in an unfamiliar and strange dimension. It's in the latter half of this episode that it progresses by getting a lot more personal for our protagonist, where you'll see a narrative starting to unfold. A narrative outside of the main tough guy out to take revenge on Batman for hanging him on Hook's plot. A narrative that subtly runs underneath it all and resonates on a more emotional level. This is done in a very subtle way, mostly through environmental storytelling, but also in no small part bolstered by Household's soundtrack, taking another swerve, this time into more mellow and introspective soundscapes whenever the mood requires it. While in this other dimension, you gradually fall deeper and deeper into what seem to be sub-dimensions, getting more and more distorted the deeper you fall, as it seems like this strange entity is delving into Dusk Dude's past, feeding on his deepest wounds and traumas. This is even alluded to in the comic that's included with the game, where Jacob, the game's antagonist, states, "I cannot break your body, that is clear, but your mind is an open wound." It all feels like a test, a gauntlet to be ran. Not merely a test of strength and endurance, but a mental and emotionally taxing test as well. This aspect is best illustrated in the level Homecoming, which greets you with Jacob tauntingly welcoming you home.
Welcome home.
Here, Dusk Dudes finds himself in what seems like a corrupted version of the place he used to call home. It feels welcoming, familiar and warm, as the sun shines down on the natural beauty he finds himself surrounded by. But seeing as that sun that greets him so warmly is offset by an unnatural green sky, and that this natural majesty seems to be constricted to a small island floating in a green void, where other similar islands float unnaturally in the distance, it's then that you soon come to the realization that all is not right here despite the seemingly calming nature of the scene. This juxtaposition of nostalgic longing and the dimensional perversion going on is emphasized further by the maudlin sounding synth-pads that accompany this scene. After some topsy-turvy dimensional trickery, You find yourself at Dusk Dude's former homestead, where Dusk Dude wonders to himself, "How can I be here?" implying that what he's seeing here belongs to his past and may no longer exist in the present. A few steps further and you'll hear the sound of fire smoothly morphing into a woman's cry, and then further morphing into the haunting sound of a baby's wail, which makes the pieces of a puzzle start to come together. Going further, you encounter a picture of what you assume is Dusk Dude and his wife in presumably better times, which when pressing the use key prompts a quote saying, "It hurts to remember." These things give the game some emotional depth and reveal that Dusk Dude might not just be a hapless victim of circumstances here, but might actually have some unfinished business with the cult he found himself involved with. So, was he driven towards this point accidentally by way of the cult's meddling? Or was he driven by revenge and planned to take the cult on from the outset? And this is exactly what I mean when I say it's clear that David has a past in walking simulators, as this level tells a narrative in a subtle manner that is so emotionally laden in a way you don't typically expect a first-person shooter, let alone a boomer shooter, to do. It feels far more reminiscent of the introspective exploration that walking simulators usually tend to offer. And while in Homecoming it's definitely most obvious, I feel the game as a whole benefits from all the little environmental storytelling bits. Sure, you're playing the game for the satisfying shooty bangs, but you're not realizing that you're being reeled in by this story you almost don't realize is there to begin with. Most of these things you can easily miss if you don't pay attention to it, but it feels like those who do are rewarded with a hidden layer of depth. So while other boomer shooters do their damnedest to feel cool to play, most of them aren't able to hold my attention for an extended period of time, because the gameplay starts to feel very repetitive after a while. Take away fun little gimmicks like slow motion combat and a swanky moveset, and it's still just constantly shooting around you with hardly any sense of pacing. Dusk, however, has pacing in spades, and manages to keep my attention much more easily, because it keeps pulling me in, not with a spelled out story per se, but with implied narrative running through the gameplay loop. It doesn't rely on cutscenes to tell me the story explicitly, but there is a story there, if you want to see it. And this is why I feel Dusk sets itself apart so much from others in the genre. It does something that's very different from other contenders, even though at face value it might not be as apparent. And honestly, I want more games to do this. It's a cool game in the shooter genre as it is, but it's a memorable journey that David created that'll make me remember the game in the end. A journey that incorporates chilling horror elements, but also has more introspective elements learned from all the years of developing walking sims. Combined, these elements make for an FPS that goes above and beyond for what it's supposed to offer on a base level, and I can only hope that future devs hoping to publish a game in the genre will be influenced by these other aspects of gaming as well, as I'd love to see another intense shooter like this that manages to not only satisfy my bloodlust, but also satisfy me on a deeper level, just like Dusk did, and get its hooks in me as well as it managed to do.